In the spring of 1941, the Battle of the Atlantic was not a battle, it was a slaughter. Great Britain, standing alone against the might of Hitler's new empire, was being starved into submission. Convoys of food, fuel and weapons, crawling across the ocean from America, were being sent to the bottom by German U-boats at a rate that the British could not sustain. And yet, the U-boat was not the weapon that British Prime Minister Winston Churchill feared the most. His greatest fear was a single ship, a 50,000-ton leviathan of steel and firepower, a fortress of the sea built for one purpose: to break out into the open Atlantic and to single-handedly sever Britain's lifeline. This ship was the largest and most powerful battleship in the world. Her name was the Bismarck. The Bismarck was more than just a ship. She was the symbol of the Third Reich's naval ambition. After the First World War, the Treaty of Versailles had forbidden Germany from building any warship over 10,000 tons. For almost 2 decades, the German Navy was a coastal defense force, a shadow of its former self. But when Adolf Hitler came to power, he dreamed of a new fleet, a fleet to challenge the masters of the sea, the British Royal Navy. This was known as Plan Z, and the Bismarck was its crown jewel. Laid down in Hamburg in 1936, she was a masterpiece of engineering and a terrifying instrument of war. She was over 820 feet long, the length of 3 football fields. Her armor belt, at its thickest, was over 12 inches of solid reinforced steel, and her guns were the stuff of legend. She carried 8 15-inch cannons mounted in 4 massive turrets. These guns could hurl a shell, weighing as much as a small car, over 22 miles, with pinpoint accuracy. This was a ship built to fight anything, and to outrun anything it could not fight. By May of 1941, the Bismarck was finally ready. She was joined by another new warship, the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen. The mission, given the codename Operation Rheinübung, or Rhine Exercise, was simple and deadly. The 2 ships were to break out from their base in the Baltic, slip past the British patrols in the North Sea, and enter the vast hunting ground of the North Atlantic. They were not to engage enemy warships. Their job was to attack the convoys, the undefended merchant vessels. The Prinz Eugen would hunt the freighters, while the Bismarck, her job was to sink any warship, any cruiser or destroyer that came to protect them. In command of this squadron was Admiral Günther Lutzen. Lutzen was a brilliant, experienced, and deeply pessimistic officer. He was a naval traditionalist, not a fervent Nazi. He understood the risks. He knew that the entire British home fleet would be hunting him. He knew that the Bismarck was a single ship and that the ocean was very large, but the Royal Navy was larger still. He had requested that the Bismarck's sister ship, the Tirspitz, accompany them. He had asked to wait for the cover of new battleships. He was overruled. The order was given. The operation must proceed. On the 18th of May 1941, Admiral Lutzen led his 2 ships, the Bismarck and the Prinz Eugen, out of the harbour at Gotenhaven. A German reconnaissance plane, flying ahead, reported that the British home fleet was still at anchor in its main base at Scapa Flow, in Scotland. The way appeared to be clear. But the British were not blind. On May 20th, a Swedish cruiser on patrol spotted the 2 massive German ships. The information was passed to the British naval attaché in Stockholm. The message was cryptic, but clear. 2 large German warships steaming north, Then the next day, the most critical piece of intelligence arrived. A British Spitfire flying a high-altitude photo mission over the coast of Norway captured a clear image of the Bismarck anchored in a fjord near the city of Bergen. She was refueling. The photos were rushed to London. The secret was out. The Bismarck was on the move. At Scapa Flow, the commander of the British Home Fleet, Admiral John Tovey, received the news. He knew instantly what this meant. This was not a drill. This was not a transfer. This was the breakout. Admiral Tovey ordered his fleet to raise steam. Every ship, every cruiser, every destroyer was put on high alert. His two most powerful ships, the battleship Prince of Wales and the pride of the Royal Navy, the legendary battlecruiser HMS Hood, were ordered to sea. They were to sail at maximum speed to the Denmark Strait, the icy, fog-choked passage between Iceland and Greenland. Admiral Tovey was betting that this was the route Lutzen would take to enter the Atlantic. In London, at the Admiralty, Winston Churchill penned a simple, chilling order that was sent to every ship in the fleet. Sink the Bismarck. The greatest naval hunt in history had just begun.
While the Hood and Prince of Wales steamed west, Admiral Tovey led the main battle fleet, including his flagship, King George V, directly from Scapa Flow, hoping to cut the Germans off. The British plan relied on two ships, two heavy cruisers, the Norfolk and the Suffolk. These ships were already on patrol in the Denmark Strait. They were the eyes of the fleet. Their job was not to fight, but to find and to shadow. The Suffolk was equipped with a new secret technology, radar. On the evening of May 23rd, in the freezing fog and ice of the strait, a lookout on the Suffolk screamed. Out of the mist, at just 7 miles distance, the silhouette of the Bismarck appeared. It was a monster. The Suffolk immediately turned hard to starboard, diving back into the fog bank. Her radio operator's hands flew, sending the most important message of the war. Enemy battleship and cruiser in sight. Admiral Lutyens now knew he had been spotted. On the bridge of the Bismarck, he was furious. The element of surprise was gone. The Suffolk and Norfolk began a dangerous game of cat and mouse. They used the fog and their radar to stay just over the horizon, tracking the Bismarck's every move and reporting it back to Tovey's fleet. Lutyens, enraged by the shadows, made his first aggressive move. He ordered the Bismarck to turn and to fire a salvo at his pursuers. The 15-inch guns erupted. Massive shells screamed through the icy air, landing so close to the Norfolk that the blast wave shredded her radar antennas. The British cruisers, completely outgunned, fell back. But they had done their job. The trap was now being set. All through the night of May 23rd, the signals continued. The Bismarck was steaming at 28 knots, heading south, straight for the open ocean, and steaming at 30 knots to intercept them were the Hood and the Prince of Wales. On the bridge of the Hood was Vice Admiral Lancelot Holland. He knew his duty. He had to stop the Bismarck from reaching the convoys at any cost. At 5:35 in the morning, on May 24th, the lookout on the Prince of Wales made visual contact. There they were, two grey shadows, 17 miles distant, against the rising sun. Admiral Holland gave the order, "Prepare for action." This was the clash the Royal Navy had. While the Hood and Prince of Wales steamed west, Admiral Tovey led the main battle fleet, including his flagship King George V, directly from Scapa Flow, hoping to cut the Germans off. The British plan relied on two ships, two heavy cruisers, the Norfolk and the Suffolk. These ships were already on patrol in the Denmark Strait. They were the eyes of the fleet. Their job was not to fight, but to find and to shadow. The Suffolk was equipped with a new secret technology: radar. On the evening of May 23rd, in the freezing fog and ice of the strait, a lookout on the Suffolk screamed. Out of the mist, at just 7 miles distance, the silhouette of the Bismarck appeared. It was a monster. The Suffolk immediately turned hard to starboard, diving back into the fog bank. Her radio operator's hands flew, sending the most important message of the war: enemy battleship and cruiser in sight. Admiral Lutyens now knew he had been spotted. On the Bismarck's bridge, he was furious. The element of surprise was gone. The Suffolk and Norfolk began a dangerous game of cat and mouse. They used the fog and their radar to stay just over the horizon, tracking the Bismarck's every move and reporting it back to Tovey's fleet. Lutyens, enraged by the shadows, made his first aggressive move. He ordered the Bismarck to turn and to fire a salvo at his pursuers. The 15-inch guns erupted. Massive shells screamed through the icy air and landed so close to the Norfolk that the blast wave shredded her radar antennas. The British cruisers, completely outgunned, fell back. But they had done their job. The trap was now being set. All through the night of May 23rd, the signals continued. The Bismarck was steaming at 28 knots, heading south, straight for the open ocean. And steaming at 30 knots to intercept them were the Hood and the Prince of Wales. On the bridge of the Hood was Vice Admiral Lancelot Holland. He knew his duty. He had to stop the Bismarck from reaching the convoys at any cost. At 5:35 in the morning, on May 24th, the lookout on the Prince of Wales made visual contact. There they were, two grey shadows, 17 miles distant against the rising sun. Admiral Holland gave the order: prepare for action. This was the clash the Royal Navy had dreamed of. The Hood. For 20 years she had been the symbol of British sea power, the largest, most beautiful warship in the world. She was fast and she was powerful. But she had one single, fatal flaw. She was a battle cruiser, not a battleship. Her deck armor was paper-thin. She was designed to fight at a distance, not in a close-range brawl where shells would plunge down from the sky. Admiral Holland knew this. His plan was to charge the Bismarck as fast as possible so the enemy shells would hit his thick side armor, not his thin decks. At 5:52 a.m., Admiral Holland gave the order: open fire. The Hood's massive guns roared to life, aimed at the Prince Eugen by mistake. The Prince of Wales, its guns still new and untested, targeted the Bismarck. The Germans held their fire. On the Bismarck's bridge, Admiral Lutyens was hesitant. His orders were to avoid combat. But his gunnery officer,
Captain Adalbert Schneider was pleading permission to open fire. As British shells began to fall around them, Lutyens finally gave the command. The Bismarck and the Prinz Eugen returned fire. Their aim was deadly. The Prinz Eugen's first salvo hit the hood mid-ship. A massive fire erupted. Ammunition for her anti-aircraft guns began to cook off, sending flames and smoke hundreds of feet into the air. The hood was now a perfect burning target. She was still charging, desperately trying to close the range. On the Bismarck, Captain Schneider's voice was calm. He was tracking the hood perfectly. He had the range. At 6 a.m., Bismarck's fifth salvo left the barrels. The shells, each weighing 2,000 pounds, arched across 9 miles of ocean. Ted Briggs, one of the only survivors, was on the hood's bridge. He saw a blinding flash, like a giant torch, from the Bismarck. Seconds later, one of those shells found its mark. It plunged down through the hood's thin deck armor and into her main ammunition magazine. The result was an explosion that beggared belief. A column of fire, smoke and steel erupted 1,000 feet into the sky. The pride of the Royal Navy, the symbol of an empire, was broken in half. Her bow rose vertically into the air. Her stern simply vanished. 3 minutes later, she was gone. Of 1,418 men on board, there were only 3 survivors. The Prince of Wales was now alone. It was also being hit. Its brand-new guns were jamming. Its bridge was shattered. Massively outgunned and a witness to the greatest naval catastrophe in British history, its captain made the only decision he could. He dropped a smokescreen and retreated. The Battle of Denmark Strait had ended. It had lasted 18 minutes. On the Bismarck's bridge, her crew was jubilant. They had destroyed the hood. But Admiral Lutyens was not celebrating. The Bismarck had been hit.
2 shells from the Prince of Wales had struck home. One had caused a minor flood, but the other was critical. It had pierced the forward fuel tanks. The ship was now leaking a long black trail of oil into the Atlantic. She was wounded, and she was bleeding.
The news of the hood sinking hit the British Admiralty like a physical blow. Rage replaced shock. Winston Churchill's order, "Sink the Bismarck," was no longer a strategic objective. It was a personal vendetta. Every available ship in the North Atlantic was diverted. From the east came Admiral Tovey's home fleet, led by King George V and the battleship Rodney. From the south, sailing from Gibraltar, came Force H, led by the aircraft carrier Ark Royal. The Bismarck was now the most hunted ship on the planet. Admiral Lutyens now had a fatal decision to make. His ship was trailing oil. His speed was slightly reduced. He could return to Norway, a shorter, safer route. Or he could try to make for the port of Saint-Nazaire in occupied France. It was a longer, more dangerous run, but it was the only port with a dry dock big enough to fix his ship. Lutyens made the wrong choice. He decided to run for France. To give his ship a chance, he detached the Prince Eugene. The cruiser would slip away to hunt convoys alone, while Bismarck drew the attention of the entire Royal Navy. But the Bismarck was still a dangerous animal. On the 24th of May, Lutyens performed a brilliant maneuver. Under the cover of a rain squall, he ordered his ship into a 270-degree turn. He circled back behind the ships that were tracking him on radar, the Suffolk and the Norfolk. And then he was gone. He had vanished into the vastness of the Atlantic. For the next 31 hours there was silence. The British were in a state of panic. Where was she? Admiral Tovey, guessing, assumed Lutjens was heading back to Norway. He steered his fleet north, going the wrong way. The Bismarck was steaming southeast toward safety. She had a 150-mile lead. The British battleships were too slow. They would not catch her in time. There was only one hope, one last chance. The aircraft carrier Ark Royal.
The Ark Royal was 70 miles away from the Bismarck's last known position. But the weather was a nightmare. A force 10 gale was blowing, the sea was raging. Waves 50 feet high were crashing over the flight deck. To launch a plane in these conditions was considered suicidal. But this was their only chance. The Ark Royal carried a handful of swordfish torpedo bombers. These were biplanes. They were obsolete. They were made of canvas, wood and wire. Their top speed was barely 100 miles per hour. The crews called them string bags. And these string bags were being sent to attack the most powerful battleship in the world. On the afternoon of May 26th, the first wave of 15 swordfish took off. They flew into the storm, their pilots fighting the wind, their navigators searching for a ghost. They found a ship. Their new radar showed a large contact. The pilots dived. They dropped their torpedoes. And, to their horror, they saw their own ship, the cruiser HMS Sheffield, which had been sent ahead. The torpedoes were duds. They failed to explode. The Sheffield was unharmed. The swordfish returned to the Ark Royal in failure. It was now late in the evening. Darkness was falling. This was the final attempt. If this failed, the Bismarck would be under the protection of the Luftwaffe by morning. She would make it to France. 15 swordfish were armed again, this time with torpedoes that worked. They launched into the black, stormy twilight. They found the Bismarck. The ship saw them coming. Every anti-aircraft gun on the Bismarck erupted. The sky was filled with explosions and red-hot traces. The string bags pressed their attack. They flew into the wall of steel, so low that the Bismarck's main guns could not depress low enough to hit them. Torpedo after torpedo was dropped. One hit the Bismarck's thick armor belt and did nothing. Another also hit, with no effect. The ship seemed invincible. And then one plane, piloted by Sub-Lieutenant John Moffat, dropped the last torpedo. It was a 1-in-a-million shot. It did not hit the armor. It did not hit the hull. It struck the Bismarck's stern, and it hit her rudders. On the bridge of the Bismarck, the helmsman tried to turn the wheel. It would not move. The blast had jammed the ship's rudders hard to port. The Bismarck, the most powerful ship in the world, was now uncontrollable. She could no longer steer.
She was trapped in a slow, agonizing circle, pointing directly back at her hunters. Admiral Lutyens knew that this was the end. He sent his last message to Germany. "Ship, unmaneuverable, we shall fight to the last shell. Long live the Führer." On board the ship, the sailors waited for the dawn. They knew what was coming.
At sunrise on May 27, 1941, the British battleships arrived. Admiral Tovey on the King George V and the Rodney, a slow, old, but brutally powerful battleship, armed with 16-inch guns. The sea was still rough. The Bismarck was sighted. She was turning in circles, a wounded giant. At 8:47 a.m., the Rodney opened fire. What followed was not a battle. It was an execution. The King George V, the Rodney, and the cruisers Norfolk and Dorsetshire closed in. They began to pound the Bismarck from all sides at point-blank range. The Bismarck's guns fired back defiantly, but with the ship unstable, her aim was off. Within 30 minutes, her main guns were silent. The British shells methodically tore the ship apart. The superstructure was reduced to a burning, twisted ruin. The bridge was gone. And yet the ship would not sink. Her thick armor, her brilliant design, kept her afloat. She had become a floating, silent, burning wreck. Admiral Tovey, running low on fuel, could not wait. He ordered the cruiser Dorsetshire to finish her. The Dorsetshire fired 2 torpedoes into the Bismarck's side. At the same time, deep inside the ship, the Bismarck's own crew was setting their scuttling charges. They would not allow their ship to be captured. At 10:39 a.m., the Bismarck finally began to capsize. Her war flag still flying, she rolled over and slipped stern first beneath the waves. The hunt was over. The British ships Dorsetshire and Maori stopped to pick up survivors. They pulled 110 German sailors from the oily, freezing water. But then a lookout reported a U-boat. The British ships, fearing for their own safety, were forced to abandon the rescue. They steamed away, leaving over 2,000 men to their fate in the cold Atlantic. Of the Bismarck's crew of over 2,200 men, only 115 would survive. The sinking of the Bismarck was the end of an era. Never again would a German battleship threaten the Atlantic. The U-boats would continue their hunt, but the great surface threat was over. The Bismarck, a ship that lived for only 9 days, had destroyed the pride of the British Navy, and in turn had been hunted down and annihilated by the combined might of an enraged empire. Today, she lies 3 miles down on the floor of the Atlantic, a silent monument to the men who built her, the men who sailed her, and the men who died hunting her.